and they make it more interesting for everybody. So please ask if you have any questions. You can use the chat function. The mic is off and we'll get going. Okay, before I start, I'm just going to start with the marking scheme for King Lear. I think at this stage, everybody in this meeting tonight has a very, very good idea of the marking scheme. But given that it's the foundation of everything we're going to be talking about tonight, I'd like to just refresh your minds very quickly. PCLM, it's the same marking scheme. It's used for all of English right across the entire English course. Every single thing from unseen poetry to comparative uses this marking scheme. It's what makes English so objective, and it makes it such an easy, in many ways, marking scheme to target and manipulate in our favour. The purpose marks control everything. They're the question. They're worth 30% of the available marks. Cohesion is your structure. In other words, is your paragraph properly focused? And is it actually functioning as a paragraph? For me, that always means, does your paragraph have a topic sentence? And is that topic sentence clearly signposted? For us, the most logical thing to do is to start at the beginning and put our topic sentence in there at the beginning. I'm going to show you this tonight. Language, then, is the appropriateness of your language to the task. What that doesn't mean is spelling and grammar. What it actually means, though, is, do you have the language to deal with the complexity of the question? I always say that that starts with, can you actually read the question? And in my opinion, and I'll definitely be posting content about this between now and the summer on TikTok, in my opinion, most students find it very, very difficult to actually read the question that's in front of them. So I would really recommend that you kind of go back and reread the past questions. Look up every word. And when I say past questions, I don't just mean King Lear. I mean every single past question for the past 5 years on drama, considering we're focusing on drama tonight, but I would do it for everything. I'd also read at the same time, I'd have a look at the marking schemes, because the marking schemes inform future questions. And if you read the past 5 years marking schemes across the board, don't confine yourself to King Lear, read all of the single text marking schemes. You'd be really surprised and really interested by how often a marking scheme from 5 years ago suddenly pops up in a question 3 years later. So I'd really look at that. Spelling and grammar then, well, that's mechanics, okay? And that's worth 10% of the available marks. For those of you with the spelling and grammar waiver, that 10% gets multiplied back into the others. So it's 33, 33, 33. Now, the key piece of information is, which I'm hoping all of you are aware at this stage, and the key piece of information is that the purpose marks control everything. They're the things that decide what everything else is going to be. In other words, you cannot score higher than, and this is so important, you can't score higher than purpose in any other section under C or L. So that means if you do really well on one part of the question, let's just remind ourselves what that might look like. Say the question is made up of an X, a Z, and a Y part. This is a bit crude. It's not exactly what the question will look like, but it's not too far off either. If the question was made up of an X part and you got a H1, 90 out of 10, 9 out of 10, 90 out of 100, and you did really well, you got the H1. And in the Z part, well, things didn't go so well and you got a 4. And in the Y part, well, you failed it. We now are at, if my maths are correct, we're now at 16 out of 30. And that means we can only get a maximum of 16 for C, and we can only get a maximum of 16 for L, which means, of course, that the P marks are controlling everything. Now, here's my theory. In most schools, the approach to English is performative. In other words, teachers come at the essay writing section of the exam technique section, as if it were kind of a beauty pageant. We're going to look at your essay from the point of view of, inverted commas, an English essay, not look at it as if it is, in point of fact, an exercise in logical reasoning, which is what it is. And the marking scheme is designed to kind of reward your ability to think critically. Critical thinking is at the heart of this marking scheme. From what I can see, when it comes to King Lear, many of the practice questions that students do train them to do the opposite to critical thinking. And for that reason, the teacher can only mark you on C and L. In other words, have you enough paragraphs, or is your language well written? Okay, well, if that's so, we're going to give you a H1. When in point of fact, the Leaving Cert question is really testing your ability to reason. I was talking to a class today and I was saying to them, we were just chatting about this and looking at past Leaving Cert questions, and we were talking about their experience last year in different schools and kind of questions that they did. And most of the questions that they were doing were things like, write an essay in which you discuss Shakespeare's treatment of loyalty and betrayal. That's not a question. That's simply write an essay on loyalty and betrayal, or an essay in which you're asked to look at Shakespeare's treatment of deception, or appearance and reality. Now, there's a couple of things about the SEC. They're not interested in you proving that you've studied appearance and reality. What they're really, really, really interested in is, can you demonstrate to them that you know how to reason when it comes to a question? And the great news, my friends, is that can be learned, and we're going to learn it tonight. We're really going to kind of put a dent into the whole idea of critical thinking and how you might approach a Lear question tonight. I'm acutely aware that there are still lots of people still joining, so I'm going to do my very best to answer any questions that you have. I'm going to leave it for a couple of minutes, and I will have somebody have a look at some of the questions and pass them on to me, and I'll deal with it then in a second. Is that okay? So let's just jump to where we are in terms of King Lear at the moment. The English paper moves in phases, and we are definitely in a new phase as of around last year, I would say, with Leaving Cert English questions. And you know, like, I know a lot of you are worried about the mocks tonight, and I know that most of you have seen the mocks. That's the other thing. So which kind of makes them both stressful and kind of ridiculous at the same time. Most of you know what the question is going to be. From the mock questions that I've seen, and I've seen them all, obviously, the mock papers, I think, at the moment are not reflecting the trend properly where the Leaving Cert is at. So what I'd like to concentrate tonight on is, and I'd really want to help you with your mocks as much as I can, but what I'm really trying to do is prepare you for the Leaving Cert, the real exam, the one that counts. And I'm going to do my very utmost to ensure that if you are faced with where I think the Leaving Cert is at, that you'll know what to do. To my mind, there are kind of 4 types of Leaving Cert question that have been asked since 2019. I would say that the more recent phases is where you should be looking at, going back to 2019. The first type of question, and I'm going to use labels tonight that are going to be slightly confusing to some of you, but I'll do my best to kind of like get rid of the jargon. You have to label things if you're going to understand them. You have to get a kind of a handle on things. So the first label we're going to use is a literary genre question. Literary genre is at the heart of paper 2. It's all over it. Everything on paper 2 is about literary genre. And literary genre just means literally, genre is just a fancy word for type. Another way that they ask that phrase, literary genre, is in poetry questions. I posted about that there on TikTok on Saturday, a narrative elements question, which came up in 2021 for Ivan Boland, and which I kind of would suspect would be a likely question for T.S. Eliot, maybe, you know what I mean? I'd have a look at it, okay? But in terms of what it actually means, literary genre is saying to you, do you understand what a piece of literature is made up of? And every single piece of literature is made up of kind of the same things, okay? All works of literature have a plot. Even if it's a poem, it has a plot. It begins with a little story and it moves down through it. All literary genre elements, okay, in terms of a play, have characterization, okay? Every play has thematic and philosophical concerns. Every play has a plot. Every play has a setting, a mood, and an atmosphere. Every play uses language, imagery, and symbols. Every single play ever written contains moments of heightened tension, and every play opens and every play ends. So that means if they ask you a literary genre type question, and there are a number of trigger words that you need to look out for when it comes to literary genre questions that most people will actually just simply not recognize. They'll read the question and they won't see it for what it is. I'm talking now specifically about the 2021 King Lear question. But a typical kind of trigger word for us that would immediately raise a flag going, okay, we're dealing with literary genre, would be are used to great effect. So X and Y is used to great effect. Another one would be, if we're talking about characters, imagine if you took the characters out of the play. That came up in 21 also. Okay, Shakespeare uses, if you see that at all, they're pushing you towards literary genre. Okay, if they said to you, well, X and Y are important to the play, the only way something can be important to a play is if it affects the characters, the setting, the mood, and the atmosphere, the thematic and philosophical concerns, the moments of heightened tension, the opening and closing moments, the plot. So the only way, okay, something can be deemed as being important to a play is through the lens of those. In a response to a literary genre question, you'd pick 3 of them and you would answer on the 3 of them. Okay, so you would have a separate paragraph on characterization, you'd have a separate paragraph, say, on language and imagery, you'd have a separate paragraph on, say, moments of heightened tension. Okay, there's some pretty low-hanging fruit there if literary genre came up. Literary genre can come up, excuse me, in 2 ways. All right, it can come up in a character question. Okay, that happened in 2021. where they said a production of Shakespeare's play King Lear, in which the characters of Kent and the Fool don't appear, has been proposed. Discuss the reasons why, in your opinion, this would be a good or a bad idea, kind of thing. It would not or would diminish this play. Okay. The only way in which you can effectively discuss whether or not the Fool and Kent, their removal from the play, would diminish or increase our enjoyment of the play is through the lens of other characters, through the lens of setting, mood and atmosphere, through the lens of moments of heightened tension. A literary genre question can also come up in connection with a thematic word, okay, where they pick a word that you would normally associate with the broad ideas in the play. Now, it's really important. I don't know what you guys are doing, but if you're in a quiet space now and you're able to study, I would be noting as much of this as possible. I will make this portion of the handout available to you. If a thematic word is to come up, I can tell you now, guys, that word will not be a traditional, inverted commas, thematic word. That word is far more likely to be connected to a word that you wouldn't find in a book of notes. In 2021, we were kind of predicting it might be disorder. It's always going to be an offbeat word, but it will be a word that will allow you to write. I was saying to the class today that when you're in the exam in June and you look at the question and you go, Jesus, oh my God, how am I going to deal with this? You need to remember there's been many, many eyeballs on that paper before you've looked at it, and they've looked at it for a long, long time. And any word they pick, you can answer on it. You're just not seeing it clearly for the first moment or two. So you never panic when you look at a Lear question. You give it really deep consideration for a couple of moments and don't panic. Park it and come back to it, but definitely don't panic. It is always answerable if you've done your work. So in 2021, they said chaos and confusion. And I just want you to have a look at this to get your head around it. And you can see in some respects, not that one. Let's have a look here. So in 2021, the marking scheme, okay, which is kind of interesting always, I think, when you're looking at these things. Okay. Chaos and confusion are used to great effect in Shakespeare's play, King Lear. All right. Now, most people who did that question would have thrown themselves at it as if it were an invitation to, write just about chaos and confusion without any real forethought into what's needed. What they were looking for, really, they were saying to you, chaos and confusion are used to great effect. Now, our guys in the Institute would have looked at that and they would have seen used to great effect as a trigger word for literary genre. And they would have said, well, it can only be used in terms of other characters. It can only be used in terms of setting and atmosphere. It can only be used in terms of language and imagery. It can only be used in terms of thematic and philosophical concerns. It can only be used in terms of moments of heightened tension, etc. Now, watch the marking scheme because I think it's so interesting, guys. Okay. So in the marking scheme to that one, they said, chaos and confusion create dramatic scenes, that's moments of heightened tension, and develop a thought-provoking and engaging plot. Plot is in our list of literary genre things. The play's thematic philosophical concerns are amplified by chaos and confusion. Well, that's super interesting. That's also in our list of literary genre things. Lear's tragic intensity. Now, I said to you there that previous marking schemes predict future questions. This phrase here, tragic intensity, popped up later in 23 and 24, okay, or 22 and 23. So just keep an eye on previous marking schemes. I can't emphasize that enough. Chaos and confusion add to our appreciation of the complexity of characterization. Okay, well, that's characterization. The mood, the atmosphere of the play is magnified through the language, symbolism, and imagery of. Now, you see that phrase? I could easily see that reappearing in a future Lear question, and I'd note that one. So what we're seeing there out of the marking scheme's 7 or 8 points is that 99% of them are linked directly to the literary genre controlling elements, which I just shared with you and which I will put in the handout that comes out to you this week. Okay, so understanding literary genre helps you deal with type 1. Okay, type 2 was last year's question. And this was a core issues question. It was a really, I think, kind of interesting one again. It threw students because I think a lot of students didn't know how to read it, okay? We had been knocking the ball around with it before the exam. And we were looking at this idea of core issues because it had been appearing in previous marking schemes. And it was clear that there was a slight direction change coming in the paper because the literary genre questions had been asked a lot. Like they've come up an awful lot. They came up twice in 21, they came up in 2020, and they came up in 2019 in some way, shape, or form. By the end of today's class, I think you're going to accept that nearly every question is in some way linked to literary genre. But for the moment, a direct or indirect literary genre question had been asked nearly every year for about 6 years. So we were suspecting there'd be a change, that there'd be a kind of a step change in how the paper was going to I suppose, appear in 2024. And indeed, there was a step change, like it did change last year. And what they went with last year was Shakespeare uses Hamlet's complex relationship with Gertrude to explore a variety of core issues in the play Hamlet. Okay. Discuss this statement with response to the play. Now, Shakespeare uses, and by the way, now you might be saying, what's he doing looking at Hamlet? It's so important you read the more recent questions because the last time Lear came up was 4 years ago. A lot has happened in 4 years. We've come out of lockdown. The world has changed. The paper has changed dramatically in 4 years. Okay. So the whole paper from paper one all the way through. That's why it's so important to really look at the last 2 years and in particular the marking schemes. So this would be like Shakespeare uses Lear's complex relationship with his daughters or with Gloucester to explore a variety of core issues in the play Hamlet, in the play King Lear. Okay, so most students who were badly prepared for reading this question saw this last year as a character question. This is not a character question. This is what we call a core issue question. So your way into this will be to identify what the core issues are. And the students of mine last year, including a good few of them who got 100%, like this person who got 100%, okay? She saw that straight away. I love looking at scripts, okay? And this is the Leaving Cert script. It was corrected by a chief examiner. We were looking at it today in school. It's a chief examiner who's correcting it because I can see the green pen. So it was used, that would have happened for a number of reasons. One reason is quality control. There is no grade curve in English, and I really want to make that clear. And it's so important you understand that. You hear all this kind of nonsense and BS about the paper that people will put out there. There is no grade curve in English. There is, however, a natural grade curve that establishes itself. And I always kind of maintain this because it's logical. It's kind of like if we take COVID. If I go into a room and throw a vial of COVID into the air, a certain number of people will get the disease. If I go into another similarly sized room with the same cohort, the same number of people will get the disease. So it's the same with English. If I have rigorous quality control in terms of the exam, and I have roughly the same cohort every year, 44,000 people, it's going to throw up roughly the same number of H1s. That number of H1s, if we don't include the algorithm that's bumping up marks, is 800. Every year, it is only 800. I always say this to my students, and I'm going to say it to all of you now. At the moment, there's 670 people in this, and it's still going up, meeting, which is pretty large. We're heading towards 10% of the, which is pretty cool, or 1 in 40, sorry, of the higher level English cohort. We're heading towards it, okay? I don't know if we'll quite hit it. If you are working hard, you can never outwork somebody who decides to work hard. So right now in the country, I'm sure we have people from all over Ireland here, okay? There are people who have decided to work hard, and you may be one of those people. You'll never outwork the person who's decided to work hard. The only thing you can do is change your position on the curve that is natural by outskilling them. And outskilling them means exam technique. More than anything else, it's exam technique, exam technique, exam technique. And more than anything else, that means the marking scheme, the marking scheme, the marking scheme. The marking scheme is their way of imposing quality control on the paper. And they take great pride in it, and they're right to, and they put a lot of effort into it. Whoever is writing these marking schemes puts weeks and weeks and weeks of effort into it, because I know, because I think I'm one of the few people who spends an obsessively large amount of time reading the marking schemes, okay? So one of the things that you should do in order to prepare for this is read marking schemes. And if you read this marking scheme, what you'll begin to notice very quickly is that this is a core issue question. My student went into this exam and saw that straight away. She didn't zone in on Gertrude and Hamlet. She didn't zone in on Lear and his daughters. She zoned in on the complex nature of the relationship, and core issues. That's what she looked at. And she approached it then in terms of her topic sentence in the following way. One key issue that Shakespeare explores is morality. And the corrector rewards this tick from the corrector. The key thing, though, in terms of, so the corrector goes, now I know what I'm correcting. You should always establish in your topic sentence a really, really, really clear, controlled, concise signposting of what aspect of the question you're going to deal with. So looking at this, I know she's going to deal with morality. Okay. Now, to get the marks in a core issue question, the most important thing is that you would demonstrate causality. Okay. So in other words, that you would show causality in your essay. Now, we have a whole process to do that in the Institute, right? It's quite difficult to teach in a really condensed space like this. However, I can show you where it would emerge. After you establish what aspect of the paper or the question you're going to deal with in your topic sentence, one core issue is, so say Shakespeare uses Lear's complex relationship with his daughters to explore a variety of core issues in the play. What you would do immediately is signpost the core issue. So you might say something like this: one core issue that Shakespeare explores in the play is the redemptive power of love. And then you might say in your second sentence, and Shakespeare or Lear's relationship with Cordelia demonstrates that love can lead to healing and forgiveness. And then you would demonstrate through a moment in the play where that healing and forgiveness emerges. And where you would pick up the marks for a core issue question is when you would say something like, this reveals, this shows, this demonstrates, this shapes our understanding of. Now watch here, we can't read this because it's Hamlet, but she identifies the core issue. She immediately goes in his first soliloquy, and then she follows the block quotation with, and reveals. Okay, and what does the corrector do? Ticks it. Okay, because she's demonstrating clearly in a very signposted way, she's demonstrating causality. And that's what we're looking for. When I say causality, we're saying this is important because this shows us, this shapes our understanding of, this demonstrates. Let's have a look at a potential core issue kind of sequence for a second. Okay, so Shakespeare uses Lear's relationship with his daughters to explore the complex and often painful nature of love. So that's my controlling sentence. So I've established the core issue, and it's the complex, painful nature of love. In particular, this is my supporting sentence, in particular, Lear's relationship with Cordelia, Goneril and Regan reveal his misguided understanding of love. I always like to put in a more in particular view of it. 3, in the opening scene, Lear demands his daughters profess their love for him publicly. Which of you shall say you love us most? And this is where you get the marks. It's your fourth step and it's your causal moment. This is where they award you. I'm not going to go into this tonight because it's too complicated and I'll fry your brains. This is where they award you a code. And the code determines your marks. You will get a code every single time when you're actually answering the question. Now, Katie has her hand up. Unfortunately, Katie, in this kind of scenario, it's very difficult for me, okay, to answer you via the mic because they're all shut off by IT. Because obviously when you have nearly 700 people in a room, the chances that you will have one headbanger is very high, okay? So if you have a question, Katie, if you type it in. How many pages? I'm going to answer a few of the questions. Let's get into that, okay? So Ruby asked, hi Ruby, I'd love to know where in the world you are, okay? So how many pages long would a King Lear essay be? So when we talk about pages in the Institute, we are always talking about exam booklets because obviously there's no point talking about stuff at home. An exam booklet is actually, and you should get your hands on one. It's possible to download them. They're up online. You can get them if you look for them, okay? But an exam booklet, if we have a look at one, all right, it looks like this. It's actually very small, okay? It's like it's got it has an external little marker here for scanning, and the actual writable area is really small and the font is really wide. So if we look at her, she starts here, page 43, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and that's it. She wrote 6 pages of exam booklet. I would say that that would probably land at around 4.5 pages of your own booklets at home, of your own stuff. So, Cian, for the 2021 question about chaos, could I talk about the storm as a symbol of Lear's madness, or is the event more dramatic? Would you consider it chaotic? Absolutely, but I wouldn't look at it that way. But you could talk about the storm, and I definitely would. The way you would handle that question, because it's a literary genre question, you would say, in any play, okay, or in any narrative, because that's what they're asking you, okay, language and imagery plays an essential role in maintaining our engagement. And in this play, language and imagery, in particular symbolisms, are used, or symbols rather, are used by Lear to shape our understanding of the chaotic nature of Lear's universe. And in I would go, and I would go at it like that. Or I would say something like this. I would go, in any narrative, key dramatic moments are vital in maintaining the audience's engagement. And in this play, moments that embody extreme chaos and destruction are used by Lear or Shakespeare to create moments of intense dramatic connection. And then you might say, well, the storm. Does that make sense? Hope it does. I'm so used to people answering me, and I wait, okay? How many pages we did that? How many core issues? 3. 3 core issues, always with the 3-paragraph structure for a Lear essay is the best way to go. 3 paragraphs, 3 ideas developed fully, really well, really, really going at it, okay? And getting into it, okay? 3 would be absolutely brilliant and you would do so well, okay? And I guarantee you, will the notes be shared? Yes, they'll be emailed tomorrow. Will Mahan be on the mocks? Well, Alex, I don't think it's going to take you much to find out what's not or what is on the mocks, okay? So I can't answer that one, and I'm not going to reveal the mock paper. Will you get notes? Yes. Is it likely for T.S. Eliot to come up on the actual exam, since he's only come up 3 times since the 2000s? I would say it's extremely likely that T.S. Eliot is going to be on the exam, because what the SEC likes to do is they like to create a paper that represents kind of, we'll say, the sweep of English literature that's on the course that year. And Eliot, I would say, has a very high percentage chance of coming up. He's only been on 3 times, and maybe this answers your question, you're right. And he's come up he's only been on 3 times and he's come up 3 times. Okay, I think that's really interesting. To plan your answer, Freya, I would say the best way to plan your answer is in February, March, April, and May at home, reading past questions, thinking about them. If you look at my students, and you'll see this again and again and again, what you'll notice is, now we might not be able to see her planning here, but what you'll notice with my students, if I pick a student here, we'll say from 2023, she got 100% in the exam. She actually got 100% in the exam, which I think is kind of really interesting to see. So did the other girl. She got 199 out of 200 in paper 1 or paper 2, and 197 out of 200 in paper 1. Now, that's actually kind of pretty rare, but 11 people in that year did that. There's her planning for Derek Mann. Okay, very limited, because she knew what she was doing going into the exam, and she understood exactly what she was doing. To do that takes skill. And remember what I said, you can't outwork somebody, but you can definitely outskill somebody. And she had spent a lot of time working out how to write. Obviously, I can't do that. I can't teach you how to plan a full essay for everything in 1 hour. But what I can tell you tonight is what you need to study for King Lear so that you can plan your way through it. What I'm doing tonight is I'm showing you how to read Lear questions. You can't plan your way through a question if you can't actually read it. So it's so important that you guys are actually able to read the questions. I can't emphasize that enough. Let's go back to a few more questions there for a second, okay? Can we go over Edmund and Edgar? I'll talk about them. I wonder why you're asking that, Alex. I'm studying 2 texts, comparative texts, and studying cultural context and theme or issue. Could I discuss the issues with theme and issue, please? I can't, because whoever that is, it's I, Kelly. I can't do that because I don't know what your theme and issue is. And the focus of tonight's thing is King Lear. However, the good news is, guys, I'm coming back. I'm going to do a whole series of these masterclasses, and I will definitely do one on comparative, and I will spend the full hour looking at comparative, and I'll help you with that later in the year. The recording will be available, is my understanding, okay? And I think that's everything for the moment. There's probably new ones now again, so just bear with me. Notes will be shared. I've asked that a lot. I think, what did I say the code was again? Is it better to use block quotes? No, it's not. Mix it up. Use both. I'd combine a block quote with a normal quote. Could I bring themes into a core values question? Yeah, a core value question or a core issue question is a theme question. That's what it is. They're asking you to pick the thematic and philosophical concerns of the play that are core to it. Do you have to quote? Absolutely, you have to quote, and you have to quote a lot, okay? My guys in a King Lear essay will be encouraged to quote, when we really get into the weeds on it, at least 7 times in the paragraph. There will be 7 different intervention points. The quote could be really small, or it could be a block quote, but there will be 7 interventions, okay? I'll talk about that now, what you should focus on when you're studying, etc. What's a code? A code, very quickly, is the SEC's way of determining what you get. So I showed you PCLM there a minute ago, and PCLM controls the question, okay? That's the marking scheme. But how they determine whether or not you get the marks for P is through codes. And you get a code, you can see the code here, code C for chaos and confusion, code E, are or are not used to great effect. And then they list out the ways in which they're used below. Okay, so it's very mathematical how it's actually marked. Now, looking at this for a second, right, they will give you a code every single time that you provide them with a fully supported, question-focused point that is relevant to what's been asked. So you will get a code for every time you give a fully focused, question-focused, supported, that means quotation, point linked to the question. I hope that makes sense to you, my friends, okay? Now, it takes me, just to be clear, a full hour to explain that normally. So I just told you what a code is, not really how you get them. And if anybody wants, I'm thinking of doing a survey to ask you what you'd like me to look at in a future masterclass. I could look at actually just the marking scheme and how it's actually marked, okay? So let's have a look at how you would get a code, right? So I've said here, this is our pretend question on Lear's relationship with his daughters to explore a variety of core issues. It's a sample riff off last year's question. I've said the core issue I'm going to look at is the complex and painful nature of love. And then I start here with my opening scene, my first content phase. In the opening scene, Lear demands his daughters profess their love for him publicly. Notice how I've indented the paragraph to indicate it's a new paragraph. And now I have my first quote. What we're looking for is a return ratio of 1 to 1 between a quote and, okay, and I hope you get this, what we call a codable moment, what we're going to call tonight a causal moment, where you give a reason why this is interesting in terms of the question. So this is what you do. Now, remember what she did? She went with, and he reveals that. Okay? This moment in their relationship reveals Lear's shallow and conditional perception of love because. Now, for us in the Institute, the best word in the world is the word because. The word because drives a causal moment. If you use because, you can't stop here like that after it. I have to put something after it. And it's what comes after it really will get you the marks. So it's a causal moment. So what you're saying is like, okay, I said to you, I'm going to discuss how the relationship deepens our understanding of Lear's, of the painful nature of love. We see this during the opening moments. And do you know why this is so interesting? Because it reveals to us that Lear seeks validation through grand declarations rather than genuine affection. Here, Shakespeare shapes our understanding of love as a multifaceted human experience capable of both elevating and wounding those who seek it. So I'm getting into a very deep, causal, kind of philosophical treatment of the question. And this is the kind of thing that would appear in the marking scheme, okay? And this is the kind of thing we're looking out for. So you can prepare these causal moments, and I'm going to show you in the last portion of the class what to study and how to study it, and I'm going to make portions of this handout available to you. The moment Lear disowns Cordelia resonates as a commentary on the fragility of bonds rooted in misunderstanding, as well as the pain caused when love is conditional and transactional. So now I've squeezed 4 codes out of that one quote. It's probably one too many. As long as you get one of these moments, it's fab. If you get 2, we'll always go for 2 each time, okay, if we can. All right. And now I move on. I'm going to move on now to my next quote. His favourite daughter, Cordelia, disrupts the dynamic when she refuses to participate, stating simply, "I love your majesty according to my bond, no more, no less." Cordelia's honest and restrained response highlights a purer, more selfless form of love. I have to come back to what I said I was going to deal with, and what I said I was going to deal with was, or look at, was love. So I have to come back to that in my causal moment that Lear fails to recognise, leading him angrily to disclaim all paternal care. So now I'm on to a new quote. You can see how many quotes I have so far. This complex moment in their relationship sets the stage for Lear's tragic journey, as his inability to discern true love from false initiates the play's conflict. The irony of Lear's rejection of Cordelia is underscored by the contrasting behaviour of Goneril and Regan, who profess their love extravagantly. "I love you more than words can meet the matter," only to betray him as they gain power. Now, this is a block quote. And what I've done here, it's a type of way of quoting. A block quote is when you feel the quote is just a little bit too big to actually deal with, okay, in a sentence, or you feel the quote really needs to stand out, that you really, 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 really need to kind of like highlight the quote. That's all it is. You can deal with a block quote in one of two ways, but whatever happens, you should always indicate the introduction of the block quote through a colon. Let's see if she did it. Yeah. Okay. She does. She puts in a little colon. "Sir, I love you more than words can wield the matter," only to betray him as soon as they gain power. Through their actions, Shakespeare critiques, now in comes my this reveals moment, the performative nature of love that prioritizes appearance over sincerity. Okay. And what I'd be looking for now, I'm not going to read all the way down through this paragraph because we have two other types of question to look at. What makes this moment so poignant is Shakespeare's ability to use Lear's suffering as a lens through which we confront the limits of our own understanding of love. Okay. And then on I go and on I go. Okay. My last sentence in my paragraph would be what we call an overview sentence. So Shakespeare uses Lear's complex relationship with his daughters to show that love, while deeply flawed and fraught with misunderstanding, remains one of the most profound and transformative human experiences. And that kind of sums up everything I said in the paragraph. Okay. Now let's have a look at our further types of question. So we've looked now at a literary genre question. We see there's two types of literary genre question. That's a character-based question or a thematic word question linked to literary genre. We looked at last year's type of question, which was a core issues question. Okay. And the next type of question would be a language and imagery question. I feel they could go there this year. I feel that that is something they could look at this year. Okay. They haven't asked it since, which I think is super interesting, 2019. And the last time it came up was in a Macbeth essay, which I think is kind of interesting. I'm just going to grab a drink of water, guys. I'll just be 2 seconds, okay? Or somebody's going to get it for me. So a language and imagery question is what we call a technical question. It came up in 2019 for Macbeth, and let's just have a quick little mosey to that question and see what it's like. Okay. So in 2019, all right, they asked us, sorry, we won't go to the marketing scheme because that's not going to mean anything to you. They asked us for Macbeth, and I think we could see something quite similar this year. Discuss how Shakespeare's use of language. Now, the key word that you need to keep in mind in terms of a single text question is the word how. No matter what the question is, it is going to have, even if they don't use that word how, it is going to have at its very center, how does Shakespeare do it? And how he does it is always linked to literary genre, in my view. But they're actually asking here a type of literary genre question that we call a stated imagery question. Discuss how Shakespeare's use of language, including imagery, plays an important part in developing our understanding of one of the following aspects of his play, King Lear, we'll say. Now, I could easily see them repeat that question. It's a lovely question, and it's quite an easy one to actually handle. Let's have a look at how my student handled it that year. It was the last year that the paper was corrected by hand. She actually got 60 out of 60 for that. Okay. She got 100% in that question. All right. I think she's in 4th med now or something. So, or 5th med. So let's have a look at, that's her introduction. If you notice, it's really short because she knows that there's no marks in it. and there's no point in really getting into it. We don't really give too much time to the introductions in the Institute because really it's a performative thing. If somebody said to me, write the perfect essay, I'd go, yeah, of course I'll put an introduction. But if I'm writing the perfect essay for the Leaving Cert, that's a slightly different thing. I'm under a massive time constraint and I'm looking for the codes and going after the marks. I'm not going to get any marks for the introduction. Remember what I said, you get a code for every fully developed, question-focused, supported point that you make. That's three things. Fully developed, well, it can't be fully developed in the intro. Question-focused, well, I suppose it could be. And supported, well, it's not going to be supported in the intro, so it's going to fall down when there's going to be no codes. Look, the corrector couldn't give a damn about it. Nothing goes in there. Now, watch how she handles this. Shakespeare's use of language is crucial in developing the theme of evil. So she went for theme, okay? Really clear. We could use the same for Lear. It's more obvious in Macbeth. Then she goes in with her sentence two. To my mind, the most notable aspect of this, okay, I'm not going to read this now with you. And then she jumps down, and this is where the corrector ticks it. She comes down to her causal moment. And look, what makes the language so effective is the fact that, okay, and then it takes off in terms of complexity, and the corrector ticks this because she's showing why that language is really effective in terms of evil. And if you get a imagery question like this 2019 one, and I definitely note it, guys, because it's overdue now, and these things are super cyclical, okay? And you know, when they were answering that question, everybody in the class that year was wearing skinny jeans, and you guys are all now in baggy jeans. Things have changed and time has moved on. And I'm telling you that this is due a step back or a return. It hasn't come up for a long time, and I could easily see it coming up this year or next year. So just keep that in mind, okay? So going back to where we were, a language and imagery question. Discuss how Shakespeare's use of language, including imagery, plays an important part. That's the Macbeth one, okay? If I were you, I'd practice that question, okay? And I would kind of establish as part of my practice for that question the storm scene as being the play's central metaphor symbol, okay? And by doing the storm scene, you've ticked off the play's most important scene also. So there's a load in that, okay? I'm just going to double check now if you have any questions, and I'll come back to you then, my friends. So what's advised the amount of quotes to use? I think I've answered that. Hi, Hifsa. How are you? How many quotes and block quotes? If only you could ask somebody that in person, Hifsa. How many quotes should you know in total? Like what I would do, and I think I'm going to circle back to that at the end, Hifsa. What I would do is I'd break the play up into characters, key moments, and then out of that, the core issues. And I'll circle back then in terms of quotes, okay? It's not as bad as a person would think. What are the three core issues of King Lear? Well, the three most important core issues, I would say, is the redemptive power of love, the way in which suffering leads to change and growth. And you could look at then maybe one or two others that are competing with each other, but those two are at the center of it. And then the two that are competing, I would say evil is a big thematic concern of King Lear. Like, what is evil? Is it human? Are we born with it, etc.? Is it nurtured, or is it nature? Does it grow from without? Does it come from within? That's all inside in the play, I think. And I mean, it deals as well with human cruelty. I mean, there's a load of them that compete with each other, but beyond those two main ones, there's a load that you could pick, and I've given you 4 or 5 there. Okay. Tracy K. Smith coming up in the mocks this year, and even in the Leaving Cert. I'd say really high percentage chance of both. I don't teach her, whoever's asking the question. And the reason why I don't teach her is I'm hearing from my friends who have taught her in 5th year. I didn't teach her in 5th year last year, is that the questions that tend to come, sorry, the poetry tends to be quite empty, that there's not a lot of meat in it. And I don't tend to like poems or poets that don't allow my students to expand into language, because language really, the poetry question is always going to be both thematic and stylistic. So you need both to be able to kind of, like, you know, get stuck into the question. And our method, and we have a really solid method of doing this, it all depends on using the language to leverage open the theme. Okay. So I think she could. Is Hopkins a poet to avoid because he hasn't been on the paper? No, I think, guys, you guys don't get how the SEC thinks. They don't think like this at all. I don't think they paid too much attention to what was on the paper last year. By the way, somebody said to me last year, was actually an English teacher said to me last year, you know, okay, and they never repeat poets one year after another, and that's why I'm not doing whoever the poet was. And I actually remember saying, I don't really believe for one second that the SEC even thinks like that. I think they think in terms of how the paper looks from a distance. So how does the paper look from a distance? Well, it must have, obviously, an Irish poet. We have one of the strongest traditions of poetry in the universe. Okay, we have more Nobel Prize winning poets per capita than any other country. So obviously poetry is our thing. It's what we do. Poetry and short stories. We're masters of it. So obviously there's going to be an Irish poet. And if there wasn't, like, there'd be protests outside the Department of Education and I'd be leading the protest. Of course, there should be an Irish poet on the paper. That's the first thing. Second thing, I think in today's world, given that there's 5 poets, I think that A, it's extremely unlikely that there wouldn't be a female poet on the paper. I think you'd be a brave setter to do that. Why would you bring that on yourself? And B, it would be very unlikely, given the political climate today, that you wouldn't put on 2 female poets, given that there are 5 or even 3. Also, there are excellent female poets on the course. So there's going to be female poets. They're going to try, if they can, to include a living poet. That brings us back to our friend. They're going to try, if they can, to reflect the sweep of kind of literature history. That means that Hopkins and Eliot would compete, I think, for the place. They could both be on. I think if they put both on, it could be viewed as being quite difficult. All right. So it's either going to be Eliot or it's going to be Hopkins, I would say. Do you know what I mean? Both have a reasonable chance. Hopkins is a great option because he's very, very technical and there's a load there. But I think you might be wrong about it being 2013 when he last came up. I'd need to get checking on that, but I think you might be wrong about that off the top of my head. Do I think Bolan will come up in June? I think Bolan has a very strong possibility of coming up. However, and I'll tell you why I think she is. It's the 80th anniversary of her birth. They just named the Trinity Library after her. There's a load of stuff there that, you know what I mean, that would kind of say, yeah, she's Irish. She's also an excellent poet. So there's loads that they can ask. She's a good middle ground poet is what I would describe her as. A poet who appeals to a student who's struggling with a higher level paper because some of the poems are actually quite straightforward. And she allows a higher level student to really get stuck in. So there's loads in Bolan that you can write about. And for all those reasons, I say she would. However, there have been years when the poet that was really expected to come up, like Seamus Heaney, the year he died, he didn't come up. Okay. And there's been a load of years like that. So one of the things I always say to my students is, let's take the psychodrama, the Paddy Power betting on poets out of poetry. Do your 4 poets. Do 4, you'll definitely get 1. I always get the maths geeks in my class to work out the chances, the percentage chances. And they're very high of you having quite a few poets if you do 4. Okay. But you definitely have 1. What King Lear scene is going to deal with that definitely. Should I write in paragraphs? Should I write in paragraphs? My friend, if you don't write in paragraphs, you are absolutely screwed, okay? You have to write in paragraphs. I simply cannot emphasize that enough. The paragraphs drive and control this section of the exam. They drive and control the C marks. If you don't write in paragraphs, those C marks will collapse. Like, you will get no marks for your structure. So if you write in a block, and I hope there's a certain person here listening to me right now, and you don't separate your paragraphs out, the C marks collapse. And what you do is you force the corrector to go in with a crowbar and prise your ideas apart. The paragraph is the central plank of critical reasoning because it's an idea. One idea, whether it be love, whether it be gender in cultural context, whether it be Bolan's treatment of personal relationships and separation and growth in the pomegranate, the idea controls the paragraph. You have to deal with paragraphs in your essay. I am evangelical about that because it's so important. What's the probability that we'll see Kavanagh on the paper? Well, I taught him, Sean, because obviously I think he's a great poet. I really like him. I'll be honest with you, I feel Kavanagh and Mahon are competing. I actually think, genuinely, hand on heart, yours is the hardest year in the last 5 years to work out what way the paper's going to settle. Last year, every poet I did came up. Okay. This year, I'm not so confident that that's going to be the case. But so what I try and do then is do the poets. As long as my students have a choice, I'm delighted, I'll be honest with you. And you should have the same attitude yourself. So I think it will be Kavanagh or Mahon. I said that in 23 and I was wrong, and both came up. Okay. I had done both, so I was thrilled, but I said that they were competing, and I think they still are. Is Boland? Yeah, we answered that. How do you know it's her last year on the course? Ryan, what special information do you have? Okay. What's the code, Cian? Now, I think I kind of went through that earlier on. Is it 3 poems per poet enough for a H1? Yeah, actually, technically speaking, 2 is, by the way, and just so that you can see, just want you to see that I'm really so sick of teachers who say this, okay? We're dealing with logic here. I'm not recommending you do 2, but like, let's look at this girl here. Just to be clear, she got a H1. She got 96.7 in total. She got like 100% in paper 1. She dropped a few marks here. And actually not in the poetry, but look, this is comparative studies. Just while you ask the question, it's kind of interesting. Okay, this is the top corrector corrected her answer. Okay, so the top corrector is the chief examiner. Okay, so this is her opening paragraph. Okay, so if you look at it, that's paragraph 1. We're still on paragraph 1. She's still on poem 1, by the way. It's a very big poem now, the one she's dealing with. It ends there. That's poem 1. Poem 2. You can see the codes there. Those who've asked him a code, see them? Okay, these are codes. Paragraph 2. We're on a different poem now, and paragraph 2 ends there. She got a H1, even though she only wrote on 2 poems. I do not recommend you do that, okay? But I'm answering a direct question from Alex, okay? Our method is 3 poems, but we are uber kinetic with the poem. So 3 poems in kind of 2-page paragraphs. That's kind of what we're doing, okay? 1.5 page, 2-page paragraphs, 3 poems. Nobody in my group has written on 4 poems since the pandemic when they had an extra hour. I have taught since the pandemic 26 or 7 people who got 100% in the exam, okay, all writing on 3 poems. Earlier I mentioned disorder was a predicted word. No, I wouldn't predict it because disorder, Catherine, is the same as chaos, really. It's the same realm. I was predicting a bit earlier in the year justice, but I don't think that's going to happen because it's on one of the mock papers. I've answered that question. Good question, Bud. What's my opinion on Tracy K. Smith? Oh, I think I've answered that already. Is it worth learning off essays for English? From the anonymous, unverified account. Okay, so yes and no. Okay, learning off essays is just a vehicle to deliver content, right? You're never going to get a H1 in English if you're just vomiting content onto the page. You're never going to get a H1 by the same token if you're going into the exam and you have no content in your head. So for me, how I always approached poetry in an exam is I would internalize a scaffolded essay on a poet. Or in King Lear, I would internalize, we'll say, and I'm going to come back to that now, that's where we're going in a minute, an essay on King Lear. And then I would learn and practice how to readapt the content to a completely different essay. So I'd be changing it radically, like radical change. But the key quotes and the moments would all stay the same. Some people don't like to study that way. Some people prefer to look at key moments and things like that. But for me, it was always, I would develop an essay that was in a kind of a narrative and I would deal with it that way. Learning off essay, tweaking the question in the exam. Yeah, no, can I just be clear, Jenny? Learning off an essay is the first step in a complicated process to a H1. Okay, like it requires a lot of skill to take a learnt off essay and redevelop it into a question focused exam essay. What really upsets me about people who learn off essays and don't really learn the method to answer is that they had all the material they needed. They had the English they needed to do well, but they're just like simply responding in a rote learned way. Okay. Unfortunately, Jenny, it's harder for me to deal with that question in the very limited time that we have in this session at the moment. But I am going to do around 4 of these before the summer, out of the goodness of the Institute of Education's heart, which I think is very kind of them to put on these free masterclasses. We dealt with that. You're typing an exam. How many pages would it be? Well, Mia, what I'd say to you is about 200 to 250 words per paragraph. That will help you a lot, I think. So keep that in mind, okay? Don't worry, Connor, about your introduction and your conclusion. They're kind of worthless. So you're not going to get anything for them, okay? So here we have somebody who got 100% practically in the exam. Okay, she just fell like a few percent under it in paper 2. Look at her intro. It's tiny. Now, I'm not going to pull up a load of scripts, but what you'll see with all my students is their introductions are absolutely tiny because they understand that there's nothing in it for them, okay? So, moving on. How do people usually fall down? I'm going to deal with that now as well. I'm going to stay on for about another 15 minutes and answer all these questions, okay? I'm going to come to that now in 2 seconds. Type of question from the list types do I think? I think a more technical question Mr. or Mrs. McNamara is most likely this year. I really do. Is 3 paragraphs really enough? I've always been told it's what's in the paragraphs is important. Okay, you're not being marked on paragraphs. Guys, listen to me. Dan, great question. If you were being marked on the number of paragraphs that you had, I would actually nearly double the H1 rate tonight in this session. There's about 800 H1s in the country. There's 600 people here. I would tell you all, if you want to get a H1, write 6 paragraphs, you'll get a H1. What a nonsense thing to say, okay? The thing is, have your ideas dealt with the question. So if I come in and I give you 3 really well-developed ideas that focus on what's actually been asked in very well-answered, supported moments, well, then you're going to get a H1. Now, Dan, I know it's hard to believe me saying this when you're hearing somebody else say something different to you, but if I start pulling up scripts one after another, I'm going to start pulling up scripts, Dan, that got 100%. Look, 140 out of 140 in paper 1. Let's go to her paper 2. So there it is. This is from 2021, I think. 140, 140. Okay. Let's have a look at how many poems she answered. And well, I won't because it's kind of taking too long. So she did 3. Okay. I keep going on and on and on and on and on and on, and you'll find the same thing each time. Okay. My guys use 3 paragraphs. It really works for us, but we have a whole method behind it. If you're writing 300 developed paragraphs, you're in deep doo-doo. The problem with the 5 to 6 paragraph approach, and in particular with poetry, the 6 poem or 5 poem approach, is you'll end up with de facto underdeveloped paragraphs. A block quote and a normal quote, well, that's Freya, just simply a block quote is you're trying to make it stand out. You're saying, look, this is an important quote, or the block quote is bigger and will interfere with the flow of the sentence. So you make it stand out by moving to the middle of the paragraph to show that it's not a new paragraph, and quoting. And introducing it with a colon. Let me see if I can show you a block quote at work. See, can I find one? I think I can. There. So look, this message is clarified in the final couplet when the mirror explains how da 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 da. Okay, and then she follows it with her causal moment and it gets a tick. This is a shocking, frighteningly expressive metaphor for, okay, and she gets her causal tick then from the corrector, her quotable moment. Okay, so that's a block quote. What do I recommend staying on track in essays, sticking to the question? Well, you stick to the question by, we have a rule. Every time you write this much, you go back, read your topic sentence, read the question, and keep them both together. Hi, Cian with a K. Come on, I'm not in a boy band. Okay, what would you recommend themes to study for students? We're going to come back to that now in 2 seconds. We did that. Tracy K. Smith. Do I have a list of key quotes for King Lear? I don't, but I'll talk about that in a second. Well, I would say, Amelie, like, if that's what you're doing, that's what you're doing. Personally, I don't do it. That's doing the Crucible as a single text. It's obviously fine. It's legal. You have to do it, but you still have to do King Lear. Okay. I think you only need 4 poets with the adjustment to be guaranteed of 1 that's coming up. Yeah, that's absolutely fine. Okay. I love Dickinson's poetry. Emer, I'm with you. I love Dickinson's poetry too. An absolute genius. Okay. So let me go back now to what we're here for tonight, King Lear. I'll have another look at the questions in a minute. And if there's anyone that's really pressing, I'll do my best to answer it. Okay. So going back to where we are, the last type of question is what we call a tragic intensity question. It's where they say to you, discuss the aspects of the play that make it, and then they link it to the idea of a tragedy being a tragedy. Now, a tragedy always follows the same arc. It starts with the central character who suffers from pride. The pride drags him down. It blinds him to certain aspects of reality. He goes on a journey of suffering and eventually reaches a point of understanding where he sees that he was blind and stupid in the beginning. And then at the very end of it, you have a kind of a moment of redemption or a moment of profound epiphany and insight, and then up it goes, okay, at the end. And that process of rehabilitation is always cut short by death at the end, okay? That's your tragedy. And when they ask you about tragedy or tragic intensity, they're saying, do you get what a tragedy is, right? The whole purpose of tragedy is that we learn, okay? We learn from what's going on in the character's journey. And as a result, that necessarily entails that it will be positive. So what we would be doing is, if we got, now this was last year's question on Hamlet. I don't think it's going to come up, but it's a type of question. Let me just jump to it. It last came up, guys, and this will show you the cyclical nature of the paper. It last came up in 1989 for King Lear. And it was Shakespeare's vision of the world in King Lear is not essentially pessimistic. This question was last year's Hamlet question. It really threw people for Hamlet, and it was discuss the aspects of Shakespeare's King Lear that make it surprisingly positive. Okay? If you're dealing with a question like that, what you would try and do is control your approach, okay, through your topic sentences. So what you'd be saying is, if we have a look here, one of the most surprisingly positive aspects of King Lear is Shakespeare's exploration of redemption through suffering. Okay, so that's surprisingly positive. I've identified redemption through suffering, which is, again, another core issue. And I'll come back to all of this in a second. Despite the tragic intensity of this play, Lear's journey offers moments of profound moral and emotional growth that affirm the resilience of the human spirit. And then what we'd end up with is, in our causal moments, something like this. This is surprisingly positive because. So that's where we'd end up. Okay, this is surprisingly positive because. So I'm going to end now, guys, with, I'm not going to end, I said I'd stay around for another 10 minutes or so, but I'm going to end with, like, what should you be doing and what should you look at? Okay, so if I was trying to get ready for the mocks, and the mocks are either happening for you or they're about to happen, okay, for you in the next 2 weeks, the very first thing I would get right, because what I'd be trying to do is to prepare stuff, because the mock questions are going to be leaked, most of you have them already, and or they're going to be useless. So, and I can guarantee you this much, they're not going to be the same question on the SEC's paper. The SEC will have seen the mocks, they will change anything that is the same on their paper. The paper, by the way, has not been printed. And during COVID, on the 12th of March, when the country shut down, the only paper that had been printed on the 12th of March was the Arabic paper, okay? So what would I look at? I'd look at Lear's journey, and I would identify within Lear's journey key moments. I'd push the key moments aside for a second, but I would look at his journey. Love test, going to Goneril's castle, confrontation with Goneril and Regan, the storm, the meeting with Gloucester, the reconciliation with Cordelia. Get all over that. Okay, you really need to know that stuff. Okay, if you know that, you're never going to fail a King Lear question. Never, ever, under any circumstances. And it will allow you deal with, at the same time, numerous core issues. Okay, so that's Lear. I'd also know, before the summer now, my minor characters. Okay, I'd know Gloucester, I would know Cordelia, I would know the daughters, and I'd know the two brothers. Okay, I'd be all over that, and I'd get to know them, and I would incorporate them into Lear's journey. Okay, so I would kind of keep Lear's journey as my centerpiece for the whole play, my approach to it. And in that, then, I would incorporate into it, what do we learn about Cordelia? What do we learn about Goneril? What do we learn about, etc.? Okay, and I'd look down through that. At the same time, I would establish what I feel are the play's 4 to 5 core moments, and they're going to overlap massively with Lear's journey. Okay, so this is the way I'd be plotting it out in my head. So I'd have Lear's journey as my centerpiece. I would then start engaging with the daughters. What do we learn about them and how they interact with Lear? Okay, and the same for Edmund and Edgar and Gloucester, etc. I would then pick my core moments. So what are my core moments? Well, obviously the love test. It initiates the entire plot. You will always get to talk about it no matter what they ask. Okay, really. Okay, you will get to talk about it. Obviously, you have to deal with Gloucester's blinding. It's a moment of profound suffering and pain. Okay, you have to deal with the storm. Like, that is such an important moment in the play. And I'll come to that one in a minute. You have to deal with the moment where Gloucester and Lear meet. That's a really important moment, and you have to get into that. You need to get good notes on that, guys, that will really help you understand it. And you have to deal with that last reconciliation leading to Cordelia's death and the end of the play. You have to get all over that. Particularly, I would really look at the end of the play, because they have a tendency to take you to the end in a question. They like to do that, okay? Finally, then, I would pay close attention to the language and imagery. All right. There is no downside to preparing language and imagery. There's absolutely none. A language and imagery question, if you prepare it, you can use it for everything. I'd start with the storm. I'd actually get in under the weeds of the storm, and I'd really kind of like into the weeds in it, and I'd really understand what it means as a metaphor. What's it referring to? What is Shakespeare trying to achieve through this really heightened moment of dramatic intensity? And I'd have a look at that. And then, okay, I would allow my quotes to come out of that. So you're asking me how many quotes should you know? I would be trying to, first of all, get Lear's journey right with all those quotes. I'd learn all of them. I don't know how many that means, but you guys, Hifsa, I think you asked the question. You have a fantastic handout on Lear's journey. Okay. And it gives you everything you need to know. And I'd start learning those quotes. I would then, when I start for my next thing, it might be the key moments. Say I do the key moments next after Lear's journey. I would then recycle the quotes. I'd get those quotes out of the journey, and I'd put them into the key moments that really matter to me. Okay. And then I'd bring in other characters' quotes, etc. Okay. Then I would do the same with language and imagery. I'd go to the language and imagery, I'd look at the storm, and I'd say, what can I recycle from Lear's moment of dramatic intensity during the storm? What quotes can I reuse when it comes to that? Okay. And I'd recycle. So you're not reinventing the wheel each time. And then I go back to the minor characters and I perform the same process. Is that okay? Now, it is very difficult, guys, in, an hour or so to actually deal with a play as complicated as King Lear and an exam as complicated as the Leaving Cert English exam. We've scratched the surface on a number of things tonight. I've done my very best to get you an understanding of what the major types of question asked are. We do have a revision course, and it would be wrong if I didn't say it. We have a revision course in February, okay? And you know what I mean? I have more time to answer questions in person and actually get into things in a more detailed way during those revision courses. And I'm also down in Cork, in Bruce, on, off the top of my head, the 22nd of February, for those of you from Cork, because I know there's a good lot of you here tonight. And I'm going to keep going on TikTok with posts, all right? So look out on that. We did have a giveaway notes competition, and we're going to announce that this weekend, and I'll let the people know who won, okay? Especially the people who nagged me repeatedly for notes. And I'm going to also, between now and the summer, I'm going to do 4 or 5 of these masterclasses that target different things in the exam. And I'm really going to try and help you as much as I can. For those of you who can't make it to Dublin, those of you who can't make it to Cork, I'm going to try my very best to help you with that. I hope you found tonight helpful. I really appreciate the fact that on a Wednesday night, so many of you stayed the course, and practically everybody did. And I have to say that that's fantastic. And it was really enjoyable reading your questions. I'm going to take a quick look at them before I go, see if there's anything else that might work. Okay, so just bear with me while I struggle here. It's after disappearing. Just bear with me, guys. Okay. Best poet ever. Would I lose marks if my paragraphs were what? I can't read the question. Sorry. I actually have no words for how much I hate teams. But anyway. Would I lose marks? I'm assuming the question said something like, would I lose marks for, no. Sorry, guys, just bear with me now, just 2 seconds. Yeah, just 2 seconds, guys. It's just after disappearing. There it is. So, would you lose marks? It said something like, if the question was too long. Retype the question if you can, guys, and I'll have a look at it, okay? I presume as if the paragraph was too long. No, how could you lose marks if you think about it because your idea is too well developed on a point? Provided you have more than one point, you won't lose marks, okay? Can I give an example of a language and imagery question and the 3 things you would focus on? Well, I did give an example of a language and imagery question. I would look at the 2019 imagery question where they actually picked 3 things and they said, you pick one of them. They could also say language and imagery is used by Shakespeare to heighten the dramatic intensity of the play. That's actually where I think they could go this year, where they would pick imagery patterns and link it to a broad idea. And then all you'd have to do is pick 3 imagery patterns in the play. Clothing. Okay. Images of the suffering human body. and 3, storm. And away you go. You're done. Okay. Broadly speaking, you can always throw nature in if you wanted to develop a 4th one. Okay. Hey, Micah and Aaron, my 2 favorite students in the whole world. How are you? Okay. Um, would you say that when you're writing an essay, you should focus on content or focus on the deeper aspects of the question? Both. The content drives your response. So what we're always looking for is a return ratio of 1-to-1 when it comes to content. So you give content, you give a point. You give content, you give a point. We kind of take a woodpecker approach to the question. We never stop. Okay. I've dealt with block quotes now a few times. Will there be another masterclass for maths? Yeah, I think I'm going to give the maths one. I think that would be interesting. I think I could really put a dent in the maths grade curve. We would cause it to invert, I think, is what would happen. I don't know. I presume they might do. I don't know. Okay. Will I be sending? Yes, we will be sending links. Do I think Evan Boland? I dealt with that. So you have an Instagram page for people who don't have TikTok. I do, Robin, and I'm actually in the middle of getting that sorted out at the moment. So I'm going to get on to Instagram and I will repost everything that is not on TokTik. Okay. Yeah, you're so welcome, Kayla. I really appreciate the kind words. I'm not too sure what the foot emoji is, but I'll deal with that at a later point in my life. Add me on Tinder. I'm not on Tinder at the moment. Okay, sorry about that. How do I study the person? You can see why we turn the mic off. Okay. Some of them are funny. I have to say, guys, some of them are funny and I'm enjoying them. Okay. But I really can't get into them now. Personal essays, guys, I will do a separate masterclass on personal essays and I will do it later on. Is that okay? Is that all right? Okay. We done? I think so. All right. Guys, take it easy, my friends, and we will talk soon. Goodbye. Thank you.